The US president's big trip to the Middle East. Joe Biden will be touching down in Israel on Wednesday, but on Thursday, a document labelled historic will be released. We'll have more on that soon. Reports that Israel will delay the advancement of housing plans in Jewish neighbourhoods in East Jerusalem. That meeting no longer on the cards. And the first images of an unseen universe, all thanks to the most powerful telescope by NASA releasing those images. Hello and welcome. This is the i24 News Desk. I'm Sarah Shalala. Stay tuned now for the evening's top stories. We're starting our broadcast today with our biggest story of the week, the US president's historic visit to the Middle East. Joe Biden will be touching down in Israel on Wednesday, but on Thursday, the second day of his trip, a senior Israeli official says Israel and the US will release a joint declaration to the public after the meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid and Joe Biden. The document is about the future of the bilateral relationship. The document, titled The Jerusalem Declaration on the US-Israel Strategic Partnership, is a historic statement showing the unique nature of what the two countries have. In other words, a platform for cooperation in the coming years. Take a listen now to what Thomas Knives, the US ambassador to Israel, had to say earlier.
He cares about this place deeply in his passion. He calls himself, he says, you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. He cares about the people, he cares about the culture, and the real purpose of this trip is to emphasize and make sure this question about unbreakable bonds is clear in everyone's minds. That the unbreakable bonds between the United States and Israel is critically important, not only for Israelis, but for Americans, not just for Jews, but Christians and Muslims and Arabs and Indians, and anyone who understands the history of this place. And Joe Biden certainly understands the history of this place. And I think you'll see this in the upcoming 48 hours. The second is he will spend time, obviously, in the West Bank as well, and emphasize again and again the importance of a vision of a two-state solution.
We'll be crossing over and getting some more insight into this story from both our correspondents. Firstly, Alec Pollard, our Middle East correspondent, with me in studio now, and later on, our US senior correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, who's based in New York for us from that bureau. Starting with Alec Pollard now in the studio. So, Alec, this document is obviously labelled as historic, as I just mentioned, but it won't be released to the public till Thursday, till after the meeting between Lapid and Biden. Tell us a little bit more about what this document actually addresses.
Right, so apparently the Jerusalem Declaration has been in the work for quite some time. Some of the drafts of the document have been leaked, so we know a bit of the content. First of all, it will address Iran, a U.S. commitment that Iran will never have nuclear weapons, but also sort of reiterating the fact that the countries, United States and Israel, will be able to use all their national resources in order to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, which would be potentially a type of sort of U.S. green light for Israel to strike militarily nuclear sites inside Iran should Iran be on the threshold of a nuclear weapon. That's something that's been talked about a lot as the negotiations over the Iran nuclear deal have fallen apart. Can Israel strike Iran? And if Israel will try to do so, if it has the military capability, will it get the support of the United States in order to do so? And it seems like this document would potentially give Israel what it wants on that front. Additionally, also, the document talks about expanding the Abraham Accords, with the big target being the other leg of the trip of U.S. President Joe Biden, Saudi Arabia. We're not expecting any sudden announcement of normalization as happened with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, but rather steps towards potential normalization. And some steps that have been talked about are, first of all, that Israeli flights can pass over Saudi airspace, and almost direct flights to Mecca from Israel. Also for Hajj, when there are Muslims in Israel who want to go visit there, we're talking about a flight that might stop maybe in Amman or maybe in the United Arab Emirates on the way to Mecca, and also other things that are in the works, like a regional aerial defense pact where the sides will be cooperating on attacks of potential Iranian drone attacks in the region. We're even hearing reports of a potential defense contract where Israel will be selling UAVs and other air defense systems and ability of Saudi Arabia to monitor its space. And just one last point, the U.S. also want to rope into this process the Palestinians as well. So they're going to reiterate a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem by trying to expand the Abraham Accords to that front as well.
And more insight into these latest developments. We're crossing straight to our U.S. bureau now. Our very own senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim joins us from New York. So, Mike, just on what Alec was also saying, we just got a better understanding about what this document will outline on Thursday. But turning to the broader visit, how unprecedented of an opportunity is this for changing dynamics in the Middle East?
Well, yeah, I think it's a recognition, finally, that there is a new Middle East. I mean, we see it every day. We've seen it for quite some time now. I think the Biden administration was a little bit late to the game here, and seeing how much things had really changed from the time Joe Biden was vice president and from the time that most of these diplomats were last in the State Department. So this is an opportunity truly to reset on a bipartisan level what's happening in the transformation in the region. And so an opportunity here to form alliances, form interoperability between countries on a military level that has not been seen before, and to finally put together a coherent, not divergent, not kind of scatter piece, but a coherent vision and a coherent strategy for how to handle Iran, not just if this happens or if that happens, but on all levels, in all possibilities, to really put together a vision for the future as to how to handle regional alliances with Gulf partners.
Thank you so much, Mike. Reports that Israel is to delay the advancement of housing plans in Jewish neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. The meeting scheduled to take place just days after the U.S. President Joe Biden's visit this week. But now it seems that Prime Minister Yair Lapid's office is saying it no longer will. The project scheduled to come before the Jerusalem District Planning and Construction would have seen one new neighborhood built in Givat Sheked and another between Yar Hama and Givat Hamatos. That's roughly a total of 2,000 homes. Still in the studio with me, Alec Pollard. We're crossing back to him again. So, Alec, we understand there's a delay of this meeting, which was supposed to get things moving with this project, this housing project. Do we have any idea of how long the delay will be for, and how will it also impact both Jews and Arabs?
Right, so Lapid is coming under fire from opposition members and also parts of what was his government, for instance, Ayelet Shaked of the Yamina party, about this delay. They're claiming in Lapid's office that it is just a delay and that these housing units will move forward in East Jerusalem. But from Lapid's point of view, he wants to avoid sort of this coming out when U.S. President Joe Biden is visiting. When Biden was vice president, he criticized Israel for moving forward with housing plans in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. In this case, it's only East Jerusalem or even parts of what is in East Jerusalem, like Jerusalem proper, so to speak. But still, he doesn't want this to be coming out when Biden is here. He wants to show the goodwill gestures as well as the other gestures when it comes to increasing permits of workers in the West Bank and other goodwill gestures towards the Palestinians. And that will also help Israel get sort of the good relationship and the good outcome out of this meeting when it comes to Iran and the Jerusalem Declaration that we just mentioned and all those things, normalization process with Saudi Arabia. He wants to avoid a type of embarrassment versus the United States with this and try to kick this can down the road if possible.
Thank you, Alec. Just moving on a little bit, and just a day before the U.S. president's visit to Israel, Israel is announcing a series of gestures to Palestinians. The military's liaison to the Palestinians saying that Israel will implement a series of measures intended to ease Palestinians' daily life. The moves following a meeting between Defense Minister Benny Gantz and the Palestinian Authority's President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah last week. Well, some more insight now on the same topic. We're crossing back to the U.S. Bureau again. Mike Wagenheim joins us. So, Mike, just very briefly, tens of thousands of Palestinians and foreign nationals are believed to live in the West Bank and Gaza without proper documentation. Israel plans to legalize some of their status. How many housing projects, though, are likely to be approved?
From what we understand, 6 housing projects in Area C, some Israeli, some Palestinian, a carryover of the policies and priorities of the last government and their workings with the Palestinians. 1,000 more, 1,500 more Gazan work permits, which will bring the total to about 15,000 since the last government came into effect. There'll be some push as well to open up an additional border crossing in the north of Israel. So a few gestures that have carried over.